Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher.
Recently I made a video entitled Life Doesn't Have the Meaning That You Give It, about the idea, that you hear commonly enough from atheists about how life may not have an objective meaning, but it has the meaning which I give it. And I talked about this and about how essentially that's just make-believe. And admittedly make-believe. It's not I'm saying that this isn't real, but the other person is saying yes it is. They're saying no, it's not real, but I'm going to make it real by acting as if it's real. That is to say, they're going to pretend. That's the definition of what pretending actually is. Anyhow, an atheist YouTuber by the name of Bionic Dance did a response video to this. And I have a little bit of a history of back and forth with her. And I actually made a video about how or why it is that I'm not going to respond to her anymore. And this video is not going to be a response. She contradicts herself enough. Just watch the whole thing and more or less she'll refute herself anyway. However, she actually asked a number of questions, admittedly quite possibly rhetorical questions, but a number of questions which were phrased in a way where I think the answer is that actually might be interesting more generally. And so in this video, I'm going to answer these questions, whether or not she actually meant them as questions, because I think they might be of general use. And they typify, let's just say they are typical of the sorts of questions I have seen from time to time. And so hopefully this will be useful. And this time I actually have something, people sometimes think I have like a script or something. And no, I'm not that well prepared, unfortunately. But I actually typed up the questions so that this way I have something to, refresh my memory about. And even a little bit of an outline to follow. So the first question is, but what if I disagree with the purpose which has been imposed from without? Now, there are two parts to this question. The imposed from without is kind of interesting because in one sense it's true, because what we're talking about is objective meaning, which is, meaning whether or not you agree with it or whatever you believe, reality apart from, your wishes. But on the other hand, to say that this meaning has been imposed from without is somewhat misleading, because the way in which this meaning of your life has been imposed by God, the creator of all that is in the giving to you of the nature which you have. So, to take a very concrete example, and this is going to sort of, recur, we've been given certain things. We've been given certain abilities. We've been given certain needs, for example. Like, we can lift, depending upon the person, anywhere from, a few pounds up to several hundred pounds. Nobody can lift many hundreds of thousands of pounds, without machinery or tools and so on. Similarly, we've been given to move about by walking or crawling or, climbing or what have you, but we haven't been given to, say, fly like Superman, nor have we been given, say, to do something like jump to the moon. Again, unaided, no machinery and so on. So these things form both our abilities, what our life can actually mean, as well as limits, what our life cannot mean. Our life cannot have the meaning of being about jumping to the moon, because we simply can't. It's not possible for us to do. And so that limit, that our life is not about jumping to the moon. I know it's a silly example, but the thing about silly examples is that they're always clear. These very extreme examples, they're not... Every realistic example is always fraught with complications. And so, they're nice and all, and people prefer them. I understand that. But the problem is, anytime you use a highly realistic example, everybody always thinks about all of the realistic complications, and you never get anywhere. So, yes, it's a somewhat silly example, but it's a very clear example. You can't take your life as being about jumping to the moon. And there are certain little children who actually do try this. 3 years old, somewhere around there, they don't realize how far away the moon is. You will actually observe them like, I can't reach it. And occasionally, like, tiptoes or trying to jump. Doesn't work. Can't work. Your life cannot be about this. And no matter how much you decide that your life is about jumping to the moon, it's not going to be about jumping to the moon, not in the sense of succeeding. So, in one sense, the meaning in our life is imposed from without, in the sense that we did not create ourselves. But in another sense, it's not really imposed from without, because the meaning that we have, that has been, in some sense, imposed upon us, constitutes what we are. So, in the same sense that what we are was imposed from without, that we did not create ourselves, but something else made us. And on this, everyone agrees. Nobody thinks they're their own parent or, eternally self-existent. And so what you are, the sort of thing that you are, the nature that you have is something that was imposed on you from without, not something that you gave yourself. So the meaning being imposed from without is in that same sense. And then what if you disagree with this meaning? Well, this is the concept of hell, the real concept of hell, not the picture book version for children of, people with bright red skin, black horns poking you with sharp things repeatedly. Yeah, I'm still on number one. Okay. That's the actual meaning of hell. That when you disagree with the meaning that you've been given, you inherently cannot be happy. Happiness comes from fulfillment, coming from being what you actually are. That is to say, happiness and fulfillment is actually a good physical metaphor, that you are filled out as opposed to being privated, missing part of yourself. If you disagree with your meaning, you will be missing the part of you that is fulfilled in carrying out this meaning. And the thing is, you don't have anything else to give yourself. You cannot give yourself what you haven't got. And since you haven't got some other meaning to give to yourself, you can only do what you are capable of doing. And the best thing you could possibly accomplish is give yourself a meaning you can never fulfill, like jumping to the moon. Again, a somewhat silly example, but it's only silly because it's really, really obvious that the thing that's being talked about is impossible. You cannot give yourself that meaning because you simply haven't got the ability to jump to the moon, nor can you attain the ability to jump to the moon. You don't live in a world in which that's possible. It's not even theoretically possible. The strength of bone and so on is all limited. The strength-to-weight ratio of muscles is all wrong given the strength of the gravitational field. It's simply not possible. No matter how big you make the muscles and how thick you make the bones, you'll never have the power-to-weight ratio necessary to do it because various reasons. I'm not going to get into the technical geekery of it, but you can't scale yourself no matter how hard you work out in the gym, no matter how many ultra mega steroids you have in some, far off posited future of super hyper steroids. None of it's ever going to work because you can't, under muscle power, actually jump to the moon. Okay. So that basically is the thing with question number one. It's only imposed from without in the same sense that your very nature, your very existence is itself imposed from without. And if you don't agree with it, you are going to be unhappy, inherently, intrinsically. You will be unfulfilled because you are not fulfilling yourself. You're not doing that portion of your nature, which is capable of filling you up, essentially with filling you up in the sense of fulfillment with your meaning. And on the flip side, you can't give yourself some other meaning to make up for it because you haven't got that thing to give to yourself. You can't breathe underwater unaided by technology. You can't jump to the moon. You can't make your life about, anything that it's not. You can only make your life about what it actually is about. Okay. Number two. I'm sorry. There are going to be plenty of objections to this about different ones. I don't want to get into the specifics, but basically the broad strokes to all of these about I can do this is they're all giving yourself the illusion that you've accomplished something when you actually haven't. So whether it's, I'll just take the example of, living happily by fornication. That, I'm going to be happy by doing this. You're actually not. You're going to fool yourself for a while into thinking this, and you're going to end miserable. And the people who are going to try it are going to tell you, no, I'm happy. How dare you say I'm not happy? I am happy. And you know what? Drunks who are obviously miserable and destroying their lives tell you the exact same thing. People who are trying to fool themselves get very angry at you when you point out the truth to them. Their anger doesn't prove anything. Okay, number two. What if we find the end goals odious, if not outright villainous? Okay, so this, in one sense, this is what's called the fall of man. Not completely, it's not identical with it, but it's highly related to it. That is to say, we are all partially broken. As such, there are deficiencies in us where we may not be able to recognize the goodness of the ends for which we are made. I'm going to touch on this later, but ends is very important. It's not like each person has one purpose. There's a whole multitude of purposes which each creature fulfills within creation. God doesn't have, one thing easily describable on a, checklist with one item for each person. Every moment is full. I've got a video, not many people have watched this very early video, entitled God Loves Beatles. It's my favorite of my videos. But everything matters. Everything has a purpose. Every speck of dust everywhere that we can't even imagine still has a purpose for God, and has many purposes, continues to exist throughout time and serves many purposes. We always like to give sort of a summary. When we talk about purposes in human language, we tend to give a summary. But the thing is, reality is not our summary of it. Reality is the, that's just making sure so I can see the recording thing so my monitor doesn't go black on me. Anyway, the thing about it is that life has a whole multitude of purposes because it has a whole multitude of moments and a whole multitude of creatures all interacting with each other. We like to give summaries and only understand things by summaries because we're so finite, but God, eternally present in every moment, to everything, has all of these ends in mind. So it's always important to keep in mind that when we're talking about ends, we're talking about many ends, not, one's summary headline. So, basically, if you find the meaning of your life, the actual meaning of your life that you've been created with, villainous, odious, or outright villainous, this is a defect in your personality that you need to, fix in order to be happy. Because, as mentioned before, there's nothing else available. There's nothing else available to make you happy but your own nature. And so if your nature has become damaged to such a degree you can't actually recognize the good for which you were created, then that needs to be fixed. This is basically the concept of salvation and why we need salvation. This is also, incidentally, why there's the concept of purgatory. That in order to be happy, you have to be... purgatory coming from the word purgation, meaning cleaning. That there's the cleansing, the making perfect of creatures prior to the entrance into heaven. Heaven is not for people who are imperfect. And that's why there's the concept of salvation, that you can be made perfect in order to be happy. So, if you find the ends for which you have been created odious or even villainous, well... Oh, I'm sorry. It's a defect. It's a defect because the ends for which you were created are the ends of, are God's ends. That is to say, the ends of the omniscient creature who is not lacking in anything, who created us for our own sake out of love. And so the ends for which we're created are good, being convertible with being. Intermediate ends, such as, the making of a machine by a fallen human being, those intermediate ends by fallible creatures may not be good, but those aren't the true ends of the thing. We are only granted as creatures, the technical term for it is secondary causation. It's a kind of delegation is the easy way to think of it. The doing of things, the making of creation has been partially delegated to us, but not completely. So your ends are your proper ends for which you're made, and the fallibility of some creature in the middle, say like your parents really wanted, and your parents just had you because they wanted an extra tax deduction on their income tax. That doesn't mean that's actually the purpose to your life, even though the people who were responsible for creating you only had this as the goal, by the way. So the ends intrinsically can't be villainous because you are being given being by the source of all being, and being is the same thing as goodness. It's a bit technical, and I've got some videos. I'll try to remember to link them on good and evil. The thumbnail's the word good, and then evil is a shadow behind it, and how evil is a privation of goodness. It's not a thing with an alternative form of being. You go really wrong about all sorts of things and get yourself into a mess if you think that. So, yeah, basically, in short, if you find the ends odious, if not outright villainous, pretty much the answer is you're broken and need to fix yourself. Okay, what if you don't accept that meaning? Now, here is where we really come to the actual adult conception of hell. Not a punishment place with people with pitchforks, but, well, what happens if you won't accept goodness? What happens if you won't accept happiness? What happens if you will not accept your nature? Well, you can't give yourself anything else, so you're going to be eternally unhappy because you are depriving yourself, by refusing to accept it, that good for which you were made, and you don't have any other good to substitute for it because you're not God. You can't create ex nihilo. You are not complete in yourself. You won't accept your completion being given to you, so you're not going to be complete. You're going to be privated of the good which you actually can have, and there's no alternative source of good that you can get any good from, so you will be miserable. Inherently, intrinsically, unavoidably. That's the nature of it. That's why hell is a necessary doctrine. It's why in modern times you find so many theologians, Catholic theologians I'm talking about, who desperately dislike the doctrine of hell. They loathe it. They desperately want universalism. Well, I mean, it's not just contemporary. Universalism was a heresy that was decried back in the early centuries of the church. But you find this theme running throughout. People want everyone to be saved. They want everything to turn out well. They don't want there to actually be danger. But they can't do it, because hell is intrinsically necessary. If you have free will, you can ask this question. You can ask, what if we don't accept this meaning? And the answer is, then you won't get it. And there's nothing else. So you won't have your meaning, and you won't have any other meaning either, because you can't give yourself what you haven't got. I mean, technically, you can assign yourself a meaning that can't be fulfilled. That's always possible. Again, you can assign yourself the meaning of jumping to the moon. Can't happen. But I mean, you can give yourself this meaning in some sense. You'll be unhappy because you will never jump to the moon. So, your meaning is to never accomplish something. That's essentially, a negation. If you really want to work it out technically, basically, desiring the impossible is essentially like a form of non-existence. You can't ever completely non-exist, completely go out of existence, but you're turning yourself into something that is at least seeking non-existence, because you're seeking, that which doesn't exist. Okay, so it's an excellent question. What if you don't accept this meaning? That is the definition of hell. Some of us will not allow ourselves to be the tools of someone else. And why should we? Well, there's several actually really good answers to that question. One of them is gratitude. If you owe your existence to somebody, you should be grateful to them. You owe them something. The first answer to that is simple, gratitude. The second answer is actually self-interest. And not in like a punishment reward sense, but again, since basically refusing to accept the meaning is, I'm distracted by a third point. Refusing to accept the meaning is hell. The only possible source of happiness comes from the meaning from your creator. Because that's the source of your continued, that's the source of your being. That's the source of the additional, being that you're supposed to accumulate over time. It's a little bit of a technical concept, but basically creation is unfolding, right? Being is coming into being. The additional being is being added on to creation. And so you're not complete yet. You're being added onto constantly. That's why we call it fulfillment. More being is being poured into you. Again, it's metaphorical language, but so in order to actually accept, you have to accept this being that is being poured into you, and you're not complete yet, and so you need to become complete by accepting this. And the alternative is, embracing nothingness. The third thing is there's a mistake actually in the question. To be the tools of someone else is to imply insofar as it implies an end that is to the benefit of the other. This is not correct with our relationship with God. God is complete in himself. God is happy. God is self-existent. God does not change. God is outside of time, and God is completely happy. Creation adds nothing to God. Creation is created for its own sake. It's an act of love, an act of generosity. Love being, as Bishop Barron loves to use the phrase, willing the good of the other as other. And so God willed our good, willed us into existence that he could give more to us. Not only do we exist, but, we keep getting additional moments of existence, a finite amount of them. But he willed us into existence that he could give more to us. This, by the way, is incidentally why God is analogized to a parent, because parents create a child that they can give more to it. Eventually, the relationship of parent to child changes. But good parents at least love their children and simply desire the good of their children for their child's sake. And so there's a direct analogy there. So in that sense, you're not tools of another in the sense of to be used for the other's good without regard to your own good, in the way that in general, like, when we use a scissor, we're not particularly considering what's good for the scissor, we're only considering what's good for us. That's not our relationship to God. So that part is that part is a faulty premise within the question. Okay, question number 5. But which meaning? And again, here we come to, this is the problem with people wanting everything to be headlined. I don't know if modern Americans are especially bad at this compared to most other peoples and throughout the world, but it seems like it to me. That we want everything in like, we can be called the PowerPoint generation. We want everything in a bulleted list, just a few simple things. What's the takeaway? What's the bottom line? Okay, what's the meaning of life? Give it to me in one sentence. And that's not how it works. If it could, there'd be like a moment of creation with a few, 3 things in it, and that's it. Creation is big. It's really, really big. I mean, look at some astronomy pictures someday. Creation is really, really big. And even on Earth, fun fact, it's a speculation very technically, but it was on Snopes or something, but I was looking, and the best estimate for the number of trees on Earth and the number of stars in the solar system is that, number of stars in the Milky Way, is that there are actually more trees on the Earth than there are stars in the Milky Way. I forget about the number of grains of sand. I think that might be larger too, but I'm not sure about that. I remember the one about the trees. It's all estimates, of course. No one's ever counted either the number of stars or the number of trees. But best estimates put the number of trees ahead of the number of stars. We live on a very complex planet. All of this stuff means things, and not, one simple bullet head meaning, but rather it's all significant and throughout time, and there's been massive amounts of time. I wish I remember the latest estimates of 14.3 billion years or something. I want to say I think that's around the estimate of the age of the universe. There's been an awful lot of time, and there may well be quite a lot more. There's quite a lot of space, there are quite a lot of things, there's quite a lot of meanings. Now, that there are many meanings does not mean that that the meaning doesn't come from God in any sense. It doesn't even impose any sort of problem. It is, however, important to realize that people go wrong by trying to take an overly summary fashion of it. I've seen this most notably among certain types, like the sort of evangelical who might go to a megachurch is, in my personal experience, the place I've seen it most often. The thing where like, this person did this, and the reason for that was so that I would check my mailbox and find something or other, as if the other human being didn't have, exist, for his own sake too, and derive, benefit and so on from the things going on. That sort of massively overly simplistic summary is, it's just misleading. That's not what's being discussed. And yes, everything has many, many meanings to it. Everything has many purposes. Natural ends. The telos is the natural end in philosophy. Especially with regard to God's purposes for things, each thing in creation serves a whole multitude of purposes, because God is far, far, far more than we are. God doesn't do things by sort of summary heading, but everything in particular. So, there are lots of meanings to things. There isn't just one. That doesn't change anything in the overall discussion, but it's an important point to remember. And then 6 was kind of interesting, actually, for an ironic reason. But and who says you're owed a meaning? Perhaps the universe regards your life with nothing but indifference. Well, yes, exactly. That's what Christians are saying is the alternative to God created life with meaning. The problem there, and it's something I highlighted, but I just want to very, very briefly mention this again, is that the thing about life having no intrinsic meaning is that everything you think is bad is nothing but a preference, entirely on the level of your preference for chocolate ice cream or whatever flavor of ice cream you happen to like, or chocolate, or whatever you do in fact like. Your preference for not being murdered, your distaste for genocide, all of these things, if life has no extrinsic meaning, if life is not given a meaning from outside, are mere preferences on your part. You can have them. You can have them quite strongly. They are nothing but preferences. That's it. And the thing is, if these are all nothing but preferences, rational argument becomes completely impossible. Now, by the way, this is just pointing out what is the significance of this. This is not saying, therefore, there is meaning. That's not a legitimate conclusion here. Not with only with the premises that I've given. However, so I'm not trying to lead to the conclusion, therefore, there's meaning. I'm just explaining what's at stake, why this is important. To figure out which of these two options is in fact correct. If life doesn't have meaning, then there is no possibility of rational argument with another person, because everything you can say in terms of good or bad is predicated on there being some meaning. And if the other person already shares it, they don't need the argument. And if they don't already share it, there is no argument to make to them. So you can say, it's bad that these people die in the streets, and the other person can say, I don't care. And there's nothing you can say at that point. You can't say that he's defective. That's to imply that there is an actual meaning that he is defective for not realizing. All you can say is, I don't like you. Or I don't like this about you, if you want to be a little more generous or a little more specific. And that's it. There's nothing true you can say at that point. Now, of course, it also doesn't matter if you lie, I suppose, since there's no meaning. Truth has, no greater value than falsehood in that case. Since there is no absolute scale of value, there's only what you happen to prefer, and, in the moment you might happen to not prefer truth. But yeah, that's the thing that's at stake, is that if you want to be able to have any sort of rational argument with anybody, you have to have some sort of truth that stands outside of the two of you towards which the other person should actually conform. Otherwise, you have absolutely nothing but which of you can impose your values on the other. I'd recommend reading Nietzsche, except he's kind of too subtle for the average modern atheist. It's kind of a pity Nietzsche actually, thought things out. Yeah, that's where you're left. If there is no abstract meaning and only what you happen to give it in the moment, everything you do is preferences, and there can be no rational argument. There can only be the imposition of values by force. Which is, you can still work out a consistent pattern of behavior in this case. It should be noted that you don't like somebody else's imposition of values by force, so you're going to impose your values on them by force. There's no abstract way of saying your values are better than their values, and therefore you should impose them. But since you've already eliminated that concept anyway, and there's nothing but the imposition of values by force, well, you're not being inconsistent. You're just doing what you irrationally prefer. And as long as you have committed to being irrational in this sense, then you're, not contradicting yourself. Or in some sense you are, but it doesn't matter. You can choose either of those that you prefer. They're basically equivalent to each other. Yeah. So that's more or less where things are left. That's the answer to the last of those questions that I thought would be of general interest. Yeah. So, I don't expect this to be of any interest to Bionic Dance, even though they were originally her questions. But I hope this was of interest to someone. Yeah, well, until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.